Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. I have to say it that way. They got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And first and foremost, I want to take and wish everyone a belated Merry Christmas. I do hope that you had the opportunity to get together with friends and family in your area. I have to say that we did not get the opportunity to get together with family as we were hoping, and that we were going to go to Maryland and spend time at my sister's house, stay at a hotel, and then go there. My 92-year-old dad, take him down there to Maryland, and my sister's whole family was going to come in. Make a long story short, what we saw, and this is why I kind of titled this Emasculate Them Into Isolation is the title for today's program, and is on the promo, because what we have are people that have been so emasculated with the fear of a very tyranny, in that this Chi-Com flu, as statistics are proving, have over a 99% recovery rate in most instances. There's very few. In fact, now we have seen this past week is that the Centers for Disease Control has even had to readjust its numbers by over 130,000 deaths, because they were coding heart attacks, pneumonia, and other respiratory problems and other problems as COVID. 130,000 deaths. So when you start taking and looking at what are the national numbers, and 130,000 of those have been falsely reported, it's all about follow the money, so on. But more importantly, is that the people have been emasculated. So what's emasculate really mean? So we'll go to our handy dandy dictionary here, and in respect to a man, is that he is deprived of his maleness, his role, his identity, castrated, and even for the likes of a deer, or remove the anthers of a flower in the botany sense. The second definition is to make someone weaker or less effective. So when you take the population and you drive fear into them, it weakens them. It mentally weakens them. And you know, I know I'm preaching to the choir again here on this program, but I thought it would be important to understand from last week when we were talking about the Tea Party, and when we were trying to take and make the key point that the Tea Party came about when you had 5,000 people from the surrounding areas within Massachusetts that then came to Boston to support the activity of not allowing the tea to be landed. Very important. I've met with people through the course of this week and had numerous conversations with all of the different events that are still going on, and we're going to talk about a couple of the reports that came out relative to the election in the second and third segment. But the important piece that we need to drive home right now in this first segment is that, as I finished last week, we don't have a capacity to have a Tea Party as we did in 1773. We don't have in place two very critical items. The first one I brought about last week is that we don't have the common theology of liberty being preached from the pulpits. Instead, we have liberation theology. We have the critical, whatever it's called, thinking theology. We have these theologies that separate and emasculate, really, what does it mean to be a man? And I saw the other day, we were at my dad's and watching television, because we don't have regular television here. And they had this commercial, and it was these football players in these extremely feminine clothes. Now, I will tell you that was something, again, I've just over and over, I've said this, you've heard it before, so nothing new, is that Lord North said that if we could effeminate, make men to be feminine, and we could engage them in the frivolity of the continent, that means all of the nonsense that's there in video games in our times, and all of the different sporting events, not that they're bad in the effect themselves, but to take and distract people from the ideas of liberty, then you conquer them. That's what Lord North said. And then the other piece was, so that's the feminization of men is a destruction of society in so many different ways. We saw that the feminization of men in Sodom and Gomorrah caused them their total destruction. So, there is something about gender. God created us with gender, and he created men to have certain roles within the home and society. So we have to look at that and what that means from that destruction, again, of those whole pieces of social living. We're going to jump back a little bit from in the moral thinking from Witherspoon as well. I'm dancing here because I'm a little thirsty. I'm going to get a sip of something here in front of you. Those on the radio, that was tonic water. Very delicious. Good for you. You need that quinine. Anyway, here's something then that the pulpits, again, going back to what was the most common theology in the speaking of liberty and what that meant, so that people were ready to stand up for that liberty, to hold true to that liberty, to know that liberty is even over economy. The other thing that the Patriots had as it moved into the Tea Party was this idea of the Committee of Correspondence. The Committees of Correspondence, Sam Adams started talking about those in 1765, 1768, but he backed off. As you read his history of all of that coming about, he did not want to be the primary facilitator of that. And what he was looking at was, what did that mean then to get other colonies moving forward in that direction? You could have those, and he did. He established those correspondence, those letters, those circular letters there in Massachusetts colony, but it didn't go, if you will, colony-wide, nationwide, until Virginia really jumped on it. Richard Henry Lee wrote to Sam Adams at one point, and he said this: to be firmly attached to the cause of liberty on virtuous principles is a powerful cause of union, and renders proper the most easy communication of sentiment. However artfully disunion may be promoted and encouraged by tyrants and their abettors. If this be true in general, How more certainly is it so in that particular state of affairs in which every scheme that cunning can form or power execute is practiced to reduce to slavery so considerable a portion of the human species as North America does and may contain. Every day's experience proves this to an attentive observer. He's talking about right now, if we want to equate it to Facebook, Twitter, Oogle, Doogle, Boogle, and all of the other technocrats. Not only that, to all of the various communication mainstream media that are out there that are taking and manipulating, that are taking and being encouraged by tyrants to take and, stomp on our liberties. So we don't have that committees of correspondence even within our own states, let alone across the states. People think they do, but all they do is they listen to other forms of media, but they're not corresponding. We don't have that leadership that has that capacity to correspond and lead and give the people a unifying cry. We don't hear it from the pulpits either. So we see the ridiculous things. As I opened the program, is that we weren't able to go to Maryland primarily because the Maryland's governor put out an edict the Thursday before, or it was, that weekend, that Monday, I think it was Monday or so, Friday, whatever it was, the end of the week, put out the edict that you couldn't travel, that they were putting out more highway patrol to stop people, especially coming in and out of state, and that Ohio was one of the states that was in this 15% increase category, and that they were going to be watching out for those folks. We had thought about just saying bahooey and going, but my dad's looking at it, 92, and he's saying, you know what? I don't want to put up with that, because you see, if they stopped you, they could cite you, and it was a $5,000 fine and up to a year in jail. And it's like, who needs that nonsense? Okay. So it is Venezuela in so many different ways, and that's a whole nother discussion and topic. But the thing is, that's important. The thing that's important is that the people are what? Being isolated because we're emasculated, and we should be unmasked so that we're not isolated. So we're seeing that all over. There are those, and we're seeing that the elite, they don't care. They're still doing their thing. But anybody that has a sense of not wanting to cause an issue will be as prudent as they possibly can. So taking and spending Christmas with my dad was a delight. We felt bad that we could not be with the rest of the family and that he could enjoy his grandkids and all of that. But, it comes to the point of, again, saying that we don't have the leadership there from the pulpits or within our political system, which I'm going to talk about a bit in the second segment here, is what is the morality in a political system, because the majority of the people have been masked or emasculated into isolation. And that's when a population can be controlled, is when we become isolated and we don't have that capacity to actually freely meet in the numbers that we need to, either in our churches or as our families. Because when you see numbers being reduced, if you do meet, you have to be less than 10. It doesn't work well. Sam Adams understood this, and that's why he helped form those committees of correspondence so that we could fight tyranny and liberty would ring forth. How about you doing the same? Come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they did. They got it right. And yes, once again, this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I'm delighted to be with you after a Christmas. And one of those Christmases where, you know what? It's that true remembrance of Christ and the birth of the Savior of the world. I just encourage you to continue to be reminded of that, and that He is the great purveyor of our liberty, and not just the liberty of being able to live in your home and everything that it means in this world, but the liberty for all of eternity from our sins and all that we've done to offend God. And that, I think, is the best reminder of what Christmas has been and should continue to be for you each and every day. I also want to remind you to take a moment and go over to libertyworksradionetwork.com or lwrn.net and to find that donate button. As they say, 'tis the season to give, and I would ask you that, this being pretty much the last couple of days of the year, that you would go find that donate button and be as generous as you possibly can and give to LWRN, Liberty Works Radio Network, and that it's a great opportunity for us to continue to fight and maintain our liberties with this network. We finished up the last segment in talking about what it meant from the committees of correspondence and all of that. Now, Governor Hutchinson was really in a pickle because of everything that was happening, especially in October, November in Boston, and all of what was being discussed and being communicated, the meetings that were going on. In fact, what he did is he grabbed the newspapers and he looked at various components of the newspapers which had no names in them, nor the editors pretty much blanked out certain things on their newspapers. Yet he wanted to get the rabble-rousers and send them back to England for trial as traitors. Just very, very interesting. And it's like, well, Tom, why are you revisiting this Tea Party thing? Well, it's interesting to read what he wrote and what he was recommending. And here's a summary of it that's in the Life and Public Service of Samuel Adams, is that at the same time, the governor recommended, as a means of stopping the progress of the opposition, and that being the opposition to the tea being landed, the tea coming in based on how it was going to be taxed. And here's the key statement, key phrase: to separate Boston from the rest of the provinces, and advised Bernard in London of the invincible difficulties in which the tea ships would soon be involved. His letters, too, illustrate the perfect unity of purpose existing among the people. Such a thing as a traitor was not thought of, meaning someone that would talk about what was going on deeper in the meetings and who was putting it all together. It would have been an absolute impossibility to obtain the slightest testimony from any who were in the confidence of the leaders, though Hutchinson was always casting about him for the means of commencing criminal proceedings against them. So there's the setting. The setting is that Hutchinson is seeing that they're going to have a heck of a time, but if we could separate Boston from the rest of the provinces, separate them, isolate them, which they ultimately did in isolating Boston by taking in, barricading it, and taking in, shutting off the isthmus and not allowing food in and all around the waters up the St. Charles River and even throughout the port, there were no goods. Everything that came into Boston to sustain the people was taken and smuggled into the city of Boston for people to survive. But if you isolate, now in our modern time, what I ended up looking at and I thought was extremely interesting, and before we get to the moral philosophy by Witherspoon, I wanted to bring out this creature that many of you who listen to Liberty Works Radio Network in particular, I'm not so sure how much on our Screaming Eagle friends down there in Lima, Ohio, but on Soaring Eagle Radio, what they may hear about this thing called the Delphi technique. So the Delphi technique, as a number of you know, is all about taking and doing what? It's looking at a target group. It's looking at predetermined outcomes. It's looking at developing mechanisms by which you take and facilitate what you want. But when you have distractors, the facilitators do what? They isolate. They isolate those people. So anyone knowledgeable enough and brave enough to speak out in opposition of what is being facilitated are often told from the podium, we don't have time to discuss that now, or we'll discuss that at another date. We hear that all the time in our political arena. Oh no, we'll discuss that at another time. Oh, we can discuss that after the meeting. So what their intentions are, and they're extremely well practiced at quieting the people, isolating those, and then discrediting the dissenters in the meeting. So we have that right now going on when we talk about, wait a minute, there's professionals, there's doctors, there's the Mayo Clinic, there's all of these who have said masks don't work. Masks don't work. Oh no, they don't know what they're talking about. You know, all these other bureaucrats. Oh yeah, we know what we're talking about. So you have this. So we're being Delphied on a national and global basis. This is the Alinsky tactics that were taught to socialist communist educators. And so when you send your kid to school and the kid goes, well, I don't want to dress like a girl because, you know, I'm a Christian and that's not how God made me. I'm a boy. Oh no, and they go through a process that takes and belittles, discredits. So we have that going on very, very large scale with the help of the media. So when you go to a meeting like that, the participants usually walk away uneasy and are in a, they're definitely disagreement with what becomes the apparent majority, not that they actually are the majority. So the Delphi technique is often successful in bluffing people into submission. I wanted to bring that out of a paper that is attached in there on the website. It's called Are You Being Delphied? It was Joan Vian that wrote this in the United Nations Global Straitjacket. And we are. Look at this. You are taking and being bluffed into submission that the COVID is going to kill everybody and the hospitals are overwhelmed and all of these things, when the facts dispute that totally. The facts are ignored so as to force people into submission. Well, that's exactly what was happening during the time of the Stamp Act. So let's jump back to 1765 for a bit. In looking at this, I had to take and draw back in on the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act, I was never clear. I knew that it was all of the different documents that would receive a stamp. But as you'll see, and you can go to the attachment that's there, that I have a PDF for you to take a look at. In fact, there are 54 different statements with a stamp duty on them for everything. In other words, the colonies could not function, the churches could not function, nothing could function unless you had one of these stamps. Kind of like what they're doing now is getting all the businesses to take and say, you know, you have a right to tell your people to get a vaccine or you can fire them. You know, they have to have a COVID vaccine, otherwise they can't work. Or you can't get medical treatment unless you get a vaccine. Oh, wait a minute, Qantas, you can't fly unless you get a vaccine. So each one of these 54 statements starts like this, which I thought was very interesting, all-encompassing. It says, for every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which, and then it goes through this whole thing of all these different stuff and how this different stuff is applicable across every aspect of life, every aspect of doing business, every aspect of worship, every aspect of any type of engagement. And then there's a duty, a stamp duty of 5 shillings, a stamp duty of 2 shillings and 3 pence, a stamp duty of 3 pence, a stamp duty of, on these 54 different items. But the catch is they knew how to cover their bases, every skin, because a lot of times things were written on animal skins, every piece of vellum, which was a type of writing paper, if you will, parchment, obviously, or sheet or piece of paper. Every one. So that meant that if you had a document that had multiple pieces of paper, can you start seeing this thing add up? For every page, there would be a duty of 5 shillings when it came to, as an example here, for auditing any public accounts, beneficial warrant, order grant, or certificate under any public seal or under the send or signed manual of any governor, proprietor, or public officer, alone or in conjunction with any person or persons, or with any council or any council and assembly not herein before charged, or any passport or let pass, surrender of office, or policy of assurance shall be engrossed, written, or printed within the said colonies and plantations, except warrants or orders for the service of the Army, Navy, Ordnance, or militia, and grants of offices under 20 pounds per annum in a salary, fees, and prerequisites, a stamp duty of 5 shillings. That was number 38. And so you go through and you look at these. There were even a number of them relative to what happened with churches, marriage certificates, different things like that. If you look at, what inventories, a will, any personal inventory, any allegations, any renunciations in ecclesiastical matters in any such court, a stamp duty of 6 pence per sheet of paper. So what we have here is what our founders stepped up against. And when we're being told to mask, and when we're being forced into the vaccines, and you could go deal with all of the stuff that's out there, that the vaccines are already, there's 3,000 plus people that have had reactions such as becoming them to be dysfunctional and other things. I mean, there's so much out there. You have to go sort through that and figure that out. But that was from the CDC itself. And statistically, what they're finding now is that people are having major reactions to taking that vaccine. But what I want you to leave you with is that where are we communicating effectively to stand up and rise up and have the moral capacity to govern? And that's what we're going to talk about in this last segment. What does it mean to have the moral capacity to govern? Because I'll tell you, we don't have that at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. And welcome back to all you folks down there in Lima, Ohio. And yes, you're the Screaming Eagles, taking and moving forward with all that great work that's happening down there with Dr. Mike and Kathy Spalding. And thank you so much for having me here on the program. So Soaring Eagle Radio, thanks a lot for having Sam Adams show up and participate in the programming that you have available to all that local area there in Lima. Kath and I were talking at the break, and what was very interesting is that we were talking about the Delphi technique that I discussed in the second segment. And she goes, just think about it. That's exactly what Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media and Google, Doogle, and Schmoogle, as I identified in the second segment, do. And that you put up something about the election, they come back, oh, that's not true, and they try and then they put you in Facebook jail, and they do all of these things to try and shame you or try and bring in these, what do they call them, fact checkers, who, as now one fact checker is under investigation by the FBI for being tied to Russian disinformation. So I think that's extremely interesting, is that here you got some commie bastard. Well, anyway, they're all commie something or another. One way or another, they're tied into the techno-oligarchs and anyway, on and on. I'm not going to digress because I want to talk about the moral philosophy of politics now, and that when we look at why we don't have the leadership necessary to develop the committees of correspondence, that in fact, as it was written about, is that they became the pseudo-legislature. You have to remember, in particular, out of Massachusetts, is that Hutchinson shut down the legislature. He wouldn't allow them to meet on different occasions because when they would go in and meet, obviously they were establishing law. And as the governor, he would either have to veto that law or he would have to enact it and do basically what that legislature did. But he had a right to take and prorogue, which means to dissolve the legislature in total. So what we had happening in the day, and you look back at some of the various acts that were there, and the ones that I looked at were the intolerable acts. The intolerable acts in 1774 were the coercive acts, and they were called intolerable by the colonists. Is that Boston Port was fined Boston for the tea that was destroyed. The government bill rewrote the Massachusetts colony charter, granting broadly expanded powers to the governor. So that was a government bill that Parliament passed. The Administration of Justice Act authorized the governor to send indicted government officials to other colonies or to London for trial. That's why it was very important in 73 at that time with the Tea Party that Hutchinson was trying to figure out how he could send all these different committee people and everything and send them to trial for treason. And then the most egregious of the acts at that time was the Quartering Act, where British troops were sheltered in people's homes and all of that. Now, that was totally against the English Bill of Rights. And in 72, 73, Sam Adams was actually, there was what was called a Society of the Bill of Rights in England. There was a group there that was very foremost in protecting the Bill of Rights in England, and Sam Adams was actually made a member of that Society of the Bill of Rights. And so he understood clearly what it meant to administer that. And all of these acts were against the Bill of Rights even the English Bill of Rights at that time. So we take and we start looking at then what is the morality in governing. We don't have many legislators, or definitely extremely few bureaucrats, who look at the morality in governing. And when we take and address what Witherspoon was talking about, again, he talks from the whole perspective that in that second great division of moral philosophy, politics, the above distinctions become more fully explained, and that it all drives down to this on a significant point at the order to show what are the great lines of duty from man to man. And that duty is brought into two key particulars: justice and mercy. Justice consists of giving or permitting others to enjoy whatever they have a perfect right to, and making such a use of our own rights as not to encroach upon the rights of others. Justice. That's justice. Wow. So when you have all of these people out there screaming for justice, we don't even understand the definition of justice from a moral perspective. What is it that then is layered in there with the virtues of public virtues? You know, what we hear and what we see is ridiculing such things as chastity. Really? What's wrong with chastity? That's a moral statement that protects nations. The other that I mentioned is mercy. One of the second components, particular components, is mercy is the other great branch of our duty to man. And it's an exercise of benevolent principle in general, and of the several particular kinds of affections. Its acts, generally speaking, belong to the class of imperfect rights, which are strongly binding upon the conscience and absolutely necessary to the substance of human society, yet such as cannot be enforced with rigor and precision by human laws. Mercy may be generally explained by a readiness to do all the good offices to others that they stand in need of, and are in our power, unless they are opposed to some perfect right or an imperfect one of greater moment. So then he goes into the other class of moral duties, is what contains our duty to ourselves. Now, when I was looking at that and trying to bring that to you on our other duties to ourselves, I went ahead and I pulled up some things from Thomas Jefferson on self-government. Because when we're looking at that moral duty on justice and mercy, even within the context of our own lives and our families, I found these things to be extremely interesting in some of that which Jefferson wrote on self-governance. You know, the equal rights of man and the happiness of every individual are now acknowledged to be the only legitimate objectives of government. Modern times have the signal advantage, too, of having discovered the only device by which these rights can be secured, to wit, government by the people, acting not in person, but by representatives chosen by themselves, that is to say, by every man of ripe years and sane mind who contributes either to his purse or person to the support of his country. When forced to assume self-government, we were novices in the science. Its principles and forms had entered little into our form of education. We established, however, some, although not all, its important principles. Man is capable of living in society, governing itself by laws, self-imposed, and securing to its members the enjoyment of life liberty, property, and peace. You see, there's these core fundamentals that were clearly understood broadly across the people of the day. And Jefferson was able to articulate a lot of them in what he wrote in the Rights of the Citizen and the Declaration of Rights in Virginia. Sam Adams wrote years before him on what is the rights of the English citizen. He wrote those in the 1760s, as well as he reiterated them in 1772. And this was much earlier than what Jefferson wrote, and then what became embodied in our Declaration of Independence. So that whole idea of those rights of liberty, of life, liberty, property, and peace are the core elements that are necessary not only in the larger aspect of governing and develop into that moral components that which those that govern should be following, but it's also what you and I need to have and what we need to follow. So first and foremost is, how do you self-govern? What does that mean? And the idea of those that we elect to govern at the foundation of our government is the whole idea that you have to attest to a higher power. Because if you think that you are it, baby, you are the cat's meow, you are the power elite, you are the oligarch of the world, I'm sorry. You're going to have to stand, before the living God, no different than anybody else. And that's clearly what Sam Adams and all of the others understood, is that we have a higher authority that those in the political realm must attest to. Qualifications for self-government, in his last couple of minutes, I'm just going to run through a couple of them that Jefferson wrote about, I thought were interesting. Qualifications for self-government in society are not innate. They are the result of habit and long training. Oh my goodness, we don't have, that's what education was supposed to be for, to bring in that habit. To inculcate means to pound into children in understanding what it means to self-govern and to govern in a manner that has morality, view, and virtue, which would drive to justice and mercy. Without becoming familiarized with the habits and practice of self-government, the political vessel is all sail and no ballast. Wow. It is a happy truth that man is capable of self-government and only rendered otherwise by the moral degradation designedly superinduced on him by the wicked acts of his tyrant. Whoa. Park it right there, folks. Park it right there. Happy truth that man is capable of self-government after it's been inculcated into them, into you and I, and only rendered otherwise by the moral degradation designedly superinduced on him by the wicked acts of his tyrant. So when I look at this third Obama administration that's being lined up, if you have not taken a look at that, it's pure evil. Pure evil. Every definition of evil is in everything that this third Obama crowd are ready to bring forth. At this point, folks, you better be praying that President Trump is able to bring out all of the injustice, all of the different things that are out there. And anybody that says there ain't nothing there, they're blind, stupid, corrupt, and part of the tyranny. They're part of the despotism and the evil. I don't care if they're Republicans or whatever they are. They're taking and using the Delphi technique on you vis-a-vis the mainstream media. So with that, pray. With that, get involved. With that, find leadership that is moral and virtuous, and come back next week.